let's just get into it. Why not? I jump in a little bit early for once. Although I'm already late, so not really early, but you know what I mean. Yeah, back from a long weekend. Uh, took a little time off on Friday. A few people were out sick and such, but not really for these streams. The art streams are always just me. Um, for those of you maybe not seen the art ramble before, I sit here and talk about art and sometimes other subjects, but usually as they relate to art. I also, do some art. If you're looking for a stream, I guess, with a detailed render to watch, like a speed paint or something, this is not that. Um, but, there may or may not be some things accomplished. Generally speaking, when talking about a complex subject or something like that, it is a little more difficult to split focus between that and something as thoughtful as creating certain types of artwork, unless you're in like a really boring phase of render. Um, but I'll talk about maybe some of those boring phases today. Um, but yeah, we'll switch over to that and take a look at what we're going to talk about today. Um, the featuring at the bottom says thoughtful revision, and that is in part because one of the things that I've been thinking about a bit more lately is that certain pieces of projects and things like that I have really wanted to do and was excited about, I managed to kind of beat to death with some of the first renders, and some of it is due to a pitfall that I am not alone in like falling into, where you just get into the minute details of rendering until the piece kind of becomes overworked and sort of almost dies on the vine, and you have to kind of step back and reevaluate. And by that time, sometimes the render that you've been working on for way too long ends up being something you're not happy with as a result. And we're gonna look at least one example of that today and see what there is to salvage, and maybe if there's a second version that I can do that can capture something that I feel like when you're trying to, you know, build yourself up as an artist, it's very easy to overlook and understand. Because one of the things that I think many of us admire about other people's art that inspires us to make our own art is the sort of effortlessness that appears to happen within that. Um, and that is not to say that it's just easier for some people. I think part of it is the mental process of art versus the mechanical or physical process of art, where uh, a lot about how to create that sort of effortless art quickly and efficiently has more to do with how you think than it is with how you move your hand, or um, what skills are slightly more practiced than others. And something that I've talked about many times in art is that unless you go down to a photoreal level of rendering, you are never going to necessarily hold a candle to the actual reality of something. There's always more details than you can possibly imagine. Um, and rendering those details is possible with an insane amount of time. But all it takes is, a little bit too much time spent for it to start falling into that uncanny valley where it feels messy and cluttered, but is still not quite real. And I think I managed to get to that kind of state, so we'll have a good example with one of the scenes that I've wanted to do. A few months ago, I feel like, maybe even earlier in the year. I don't even remember. Time has been very slippery. But one of the things I wanted to do with this stream was to well, when back when it was primarily on Twitch, was like have different types of streams and have each one have their own sort of scenes and set pieces and things like that, so that as you watch different parts of the stream, you're traveling to different locations, and the things that I would be working on, like art or playing games and stuff, would be on screens or projections within that world. So you're, a little more immersed in that. And I've still very much like that idea. But the first thing I did was choose a very complicated perspective drawing, based on a photo that I like the atmosphere of, and some elements that I've wanted to include from, some of my own designs. And I proceeded to beat that composition to death with details and stuff for months. So rather than laying in thick chunks of ink and things like that for dark spots, I meticulously line drew down to, single digit pixels on a 8K image, uh, little sketchy details of all of the weathering and things like that are barely visible once you add in all of the other layers that I've since tried to add in, and immediately bury all of that work. And the result is something that feels kind of sketchy and overworked, but also kind of incomplete. Like it just doesn't quite feel like it lands where I wanted it to land, and lighting it all has been that much harder as a result, so that it doesn't feel like um, a brightly lit space. But yeah, it's been a mess, and so I wanted to talk about that stuff a little bit while I see what I can do about revisiting something like this, and seeing what I can and cannot salvage from something like that. Because there's a lot of work that's gone into it, but if I'm not pleased with the final result and I put it into production or usage anyways, then all I'm really doing is sinking a lot of time and effort into something that is going to constantly upset me when I look at it. So, you got to make your choices where you can. Is it going to be something that discourages you and constantly makes you feel like you're not a good artist every time you use it on like a stream or something, or every time you put it out there for other people to see? Um, and whether or not that's in your head versus like legitimate because you've kind of worked it into the ground. And we're gonna see if I can navigate all of those nuances. It's not gonna be the same for everybody, and some of the principles that I've talked about just now regarding like that effortless sort of artwork that we admire from artists who have been working for years, or just kind of show up on the scene and knock stuff out without blinking. I think some of it has to do with confidence. Uh, Confidence in what you're doing and being able to let certain stuff be interpreted rather than rendered. Uh, Something I have a little bit of trouble with. In part because in my day to day life, I am very conscious of people misunderstanding what I say or do, and will often go to great lengths to ensure that those misunderstandings do not happen. So when it comes down to the artwork, when I'm trying to convey mood, atmospheres, and such things, I probably overthink it a fair degree. And while I may not have the answers just yet on how to do that, being aware of it, I guess, is like how to stop that from happening. Being aware of it at least is part of the battle. Um, so let's take a look over on the art stream side. We'll move some things around. I don't remember where I am. So yeah, That's that's not quite the mood um on that crab that I'm feeling right now, but it's not as far off as you might expect. Throw out a little as usual. I'll throw a little something in to keep it from feeling entirely silent, but we'll try not to put stuff so loud that it drowns out my voice. Especially when I get kind of muttery mid diatribe. I have to turn stuff way down for me so I don't overinterpret how loud it is for the streams. So, this crab is one of those things that I feel like I overworked because uh it looks lovely, right? It's highly detailed. I could practically use this thing as a VTuber rig if I wanted. Um Basically I've built it out in such a way that I could literally rig this and put a bunch of different faces on the screen as separate layers and make that my, you know, persona or whatever. That's well within the realm of possibility with how much detail, time, and effort I put into making this crab just so you could put chat on it and so that I could do weird stuff like pull the screen out. Just so, yeah, I could do something like this where I pull the screen out and have the cables and stuff string out behind it, which I think I picked up the mask so it didn't do it that time. But yeah. Yeah, just so I could do this and have the wires and stuff still be dangling into the frame. Um did all of that, and a lot of the work inside of this that you can see is not even visible. All these scratches and dust and things like this is almost full screen right now, but on average it's probably going to be like a fraction of this size, you know? It's going to be like this big on screen. So it's going to be like down here. You know, not too much bigger than my character is now. That was the whole goal of this super elaborate design with this little screen. I could have made it a drone, I could have made it literally anything, but I made it a crab with 8 legs. Uh and internal workings and tool bits on the ends of it. It's kind of nuts. And I probably had this in the works for literal months before I got to this stage, and I still technically need to take this grime and noise layer and split it up or duplicate it onto all of the subsequent pieces so that those pieces can move independently without the textures disappearing. If I want to add any animation to it, it's a very elaborate puppet. Now, because it is a puppet, if I don't do any animation to it, all of that work will be wasted. So I do need to think about that. Um, but yeah, I got caught up in the idea, I think, and just ran with it so far that I started losing the point of it to begin with. And while I'm more pleased with the result of this, than I am with the next piece I'm going to show you. There's a lot of effort that I could have saved here if I had thought more realistically about how small on average it was going to be and what purposes it serves. So basically, you know, um, if I'm getting a lot of chat interaction, it serves a great purpose. It's got a lot of chat scroll that'll go through it. Um, if I don't, it's just a little idle set piece that does almost nothing. That's just a fact. Um, and with me multi-streaming now, this is on Picardo because I've been trying to do Picardo for art, but also going to YouTube and stuff right now so that I can more easily edit that in place and put some stuff on the YouTube side to draw attention to other streams. But um, chat integration for these other platforms like YouTube and Picardo, I haven't even looked how to do that yet. So now this tool could be potentially obsolete unless I do a bunch of work to integrate it into stream stuff. Like I said, very elaborate puppet that is now kind of on the verge of useless if I don't do a lot of further work to justify its the time sink, which I got to think about. Like, is it worth digging into this further so that I can say that I completed it, and not to discount its actual function as a sort of out of that will therefore give me more confidence to continue to work on it versus something that I put a lot of effort into and could not or did not use. Like, there's two very different problems. And the psychological element of completing something and just being proud of the end result, even if it is not for a specific purpose or does not ultimately give me some sort of net gain apart from confidence, like, that still is not necessarily a loss. Just, whether or not I feel like the amount of time spent on it was worth the boost in confidence that a completed version ultimately gives me. And there's a little bit of that equation going on all the time for me now, because in trying to make art my business, there's a lot of added pressure to create things, and you start thinking about those things in ways that are maybe not helpful for creative processes. You start thinking in marketing instead of creative terms. You start comparing it immediately to other things that have been successful, which is ultimately kind of defeating the purpose of creativity if all you're doing is copying something that people already like. Unless you're doing something additive, you're creating and adding something different to that. If me, or at least, a bit of a waste. If I'm not adding anything to the equation, whether it be or what I have to say, or the artwork itself and what it has to say, then this might as well just be a hobby, and I need to find something else as a profession. Because if I'm not adding anything, if something I write is just for me, the art I create is just useful or helpful for me, then that's all it does. And I could do that as a hobby and stop. But then I would, of course, I need to find other work to, live and survive. But the whole purpose of all of this was to try and do something a little bit different. And I know I'm starting to linger on the, profession side again. But part of the profession side of trying to make art work for you in that way is being able to create consistently and efficiently and not have it be such a physical and mental trial to create artwork um, at a certain degree of scale or repetition. And I think that's where the mental part comes in that I was talking about, where you need to try and learn how to get to that sort of minimum viable. I hate saying minimum viable product because then it feels like you're just creating a commodity meant to be sold. But uh, technically, what I'm stating here is a minimum viable version of the artwork that conveys everything you wanted to convey. Because the human mind will always be probably better at add every single detail yourself. Um, so I'm gonna look at we're gonna look at this piece right here, and I put some images in here as sort of examples of the things that I was trying to do with this. Um, so effectively, I wanted to have a little space for the crab to sit on. Let me do something here real quick. We're gonna see if I can do this. See if I can bring in just a quick PNG of this thing so I can show you what I was trying to do. So this was the whole purpose of the chat crab, was to sit right here at about this size actually, and kind of be, part of the scene. The other part, of course, being myself, and this is where a mock-up earlier on might have done me some good, so that I understand fully like what it is that I'm trying to do, and don't kind of focus in on different details because what there's a few things that happened with me trying to create these new scenes. First off, I was pretty ambitious with the project, but for hopefully good reasons. I wanted to, kind of elevate my, step up my streaming game a little bit and do more interesting things with it that felt like they were more than just me showing up to kind of screw around, right? So you have this version of me that floats around. I can get down here next to the crab. I can move around in the frame. And if I want to, I can go back a few stages. So like at this point, I could get behind this stuff to a degree. And further back, come out from behind the walls. And there's even parts where I probably need to fill in some sort of backdrop here to indicate the rest of the walls because there's just gaps. But I was trying to make an elaborate set, is what I was doing here, and I'm not unhappy with it in its current state, but I could have gotten to where I am a lot sooner if I had chilled out on certain things that are, kind of excessive, unnecessary. Um, that took hours and hours and hours to sort of create that I just did not have to be doing. as fun as it is for me to get all the way back here, how often am I actually going to do that? Am I, am I going to be juggling these layers consistently? Or am I going to kind of ignore some of these things as time goes on for the efficiency of a stream? Like, do I screw around in this screen a lot? If I was doing more chat and conversation stuff, like, again, more stuff that requires a lot of interaction with the stream and its viewers, then, this level of detail makes a degree of sense. I could even get back here behind Gladys, and unfortunately I can't really scale automatically. Like, I can do it a little bit easier with OBS, but it's still like a 2 application process to do all these button switches and things. There's lots of things I could probably script to make it easier. But like, this level of elaborate set design is not necessarily the problem. Because all of these pieces I figured out relatively early. These things were set in place some time ago in like the planning stages, and I just kind of let the level of detail balloon out of control. In particular, in a couple of places. Like, the foreground elements, sure. Like, if I take away these two stand-ins, like, these foreground elements, these are right here close to the viewer. They warrant a certain level of detail, right? Because even at full scale, you can see this rubble and these cables and these things close in the foreground, kind of casting small shadows, having small details and things like the shadows that are cast on the wall, the kind of irregularity of light through water, even if it's not, even if it doesn't make a full degree of sense based on, the fact that there's no surface to be refracted from. Like, making it hazy and weird was part of the point. But, like, there's a stage at which a lot of this was just done. And I kind of let it get out of control. So let's take a look at where it started getting to be a lot. So let's take a look at this back wall, because I feel like the back wall is where you really get an idea. So this wall back here, look how close you have to get to see the scratches, the little marks, the like rust marks and things that I haven't even added color to yet. Like, all these rusted out portions, I haven't even painted in the roughs of that yet. So it's all just this kind of blue gradient scale that I use to kind of lay in a background color over things. And I really don't want or need to add a lot of that extra color. If anything, I could bleed some of the colors out of some of this. But, when you reintroduce light underwater, the colors do come back to a degree. But yeah, like, the further down in the water you go, the more limited the spectrum of light can be, until you apply your own light. That's just, one of those things. A product of physics or materials or whatever you want to call it. But, like, I spent a lot of time on this, all these little scratches and details. Like, a lot of this stuff in the background, like these little tiny sketch marks and holes punched in it, like, there's stuff of this level of detail, like this level of detail, behind objects in the frame, just in case I decide to move them later or remove them. That's how far in I kind of got sucked. I got sucked in. So like something like this. Uh, so yeah, there's all this detail across the baseboard here. Pointless. Technically pointless. Did I learn a little bit from doing that? Yes. Did I learn more from doing that than I did from the parts where you actually see it? No. Is the lesson learned so valuable that I should have spent countless hours? Um Not countless. I think it was all told like this back wall detailing all of this. I spent at least 1 4 hour stream just doing the details on this back wall. 4 hours on a back wall that is going to be not only hidden by the layers of atmosphere, which I have several atmospheric layers now between this that cut the sharpness of that layer. There's several of them because it's not air, it's water. Not only that, but then I have these objects which cover a big chunk of the well lit portions of that wall. Now, again, some of the work might not be wasted because it is a set. It is not a single illustration. It is meant to be broken apart into layers that will then be strung together, over, you know, several planes so that I can move them like pieces of a set. Um, I even had like ideas of like creating artificial parallax and stuff like that. Um, Somehow, like just in theory. But, I never actually did that, of course. And to do it now, I would still have to figure out if it's even possible to do dynamically like that. Where if I shift too far to the left or the right, if the whole thing kind of shifts subtly, but that would be kind of disorienting for the viewer who is a fixed point, you know? Unless I'm taking the camera through here in 3 dimensional space, like there's not a lot of reason for me to have that many layers, unless I do a lot with that. So, um, the potential is there for lots of cool stuff. And there's still a little bit of work I have left to do before I feel satisfied that this is finished. But I guess the point I'm trying to make here is I could have saved myself a lot of time and a lot of anguish, um, because I spent a lot of time avoiding working on this because it felt like there was so much work left to do, um, that it actively pushed it out of my mind. And, because this was the most complex one, I thought I would hopefully get through all of this complexity, um, and get it out of the way so that I would be less daunted by the subsequent pieces. But because I set the bar so high for this, I kind of kept myself from revisiting the other scenes that I wanted to do. And now, of course, I've gone on long enough that I recognize that certain stuff for Twitch, for example, unless I already have like the established audience or whatever, it's going to be hard to build, like an art related audience. It's even kind of hard to build gaming related audience because there's so many streams. And, like I said, it's easy to show up for streams. I said this previously, not today. It's easy to show up and stream. It is not easy to be a good stream. It is not easy to run a good stream or have a sort of consistent ethic around it. It's a very unstable sort of process, and um, unless you have stuff coming in that pays the bills from those streams, like it's very much a self-regulated process. So, because I've not been making money off of streams, like that is a very self-enforced thing. So you have to kind of enjoy it. You have to kind of want to do it. And the more you lean into making it like this, where I made something that felt like so much work that I was psyching myself out and pushing it further away. Like coming at this today and doing this evaluation, I should have done this a long time ago and not when I was like really stressing myself out and saying, like, hey, if I'm stressing myself out with this, it's not just because I suck. It's because the thing I've decided to do kind of sucks. Not the concept being bad, but the way in which I'm going about it. The way in which I'm thinking about it. The way in which I'm making more work for myself and making it easy for me to inflate the level of work in my head. Um because all these little tiny details, all these little tiny marks, I could have hinted at a lot of these things. I could have left a lot of them in shadow. I could have made the frames a lot darker. I could have done a lot of things that, ultimately hardly anyone would have noticed the difference. I could have chosen a different style. I could have chosen not to impose all of these future possible uses on myself so that I could complete the illustration and then think about doing those things later. Um, but instead, I put all the eggs in this one basket and uh, struggled to complete the composition. It is still not technically complete even now because I need to go through and add the final layer of paint and stuff on this before it is considered done. Technically, this chat crab is not completely done because I still need to duplicate some layers and move them around and export the files um, as the separate PNG pieces that will be necessary in order to do the sort of like movements and stuff that I want. Um, I still have to sit down and create several animated sequences by moving some pieces around and trying to keep the screen stable so that it matches chat when I put chat on the screen. Or I need to decide to change that to something else and not worry about chat being on the screen and just give it faces or text or other things like that as an alternative. And then I don't have to worry about locking the screen in place so that the chat can be overlaid through OBS, especially when it comes to, like other streams and stuff. Um, but the whole point was to be able to put like this title down here at the bottom, overworking and revision. The whole point of things like this crab were to create that immersive world, to put stuff in a scene in 3 dimensions. Because part of me desperately wants to work on 3D, but in the time it takes me to learn that, I could probably go broke at this point. Like the time to have learned all of that 3D stuff was probably 6, 8, 10 months ago. Um, in order to kind of build out 3 dimensional stuff. I still want to do it at some point in the future, but all of that pie in the sky, like filmmaking sort of stuff that I want to do, I need to start smaller probably and understand that like the broad strokes of this, like this sketch right here of one of the other scenes that I wanted to do for gaming um is very much, like me. So having something and bringing in crab, like these pieces are now done and can kind of sit on here, but this is a much simpler composition than this. And realistically speaking, with detail, a few more detail elements, I could export this and be relatively satisfied. Um, because it is still more elaborate and more interesting in composition and details and things like that than my current chatting screen, which, we didn't spend a lot of time on, but just to take a look at it again. Like, this is my chatting screen that I did originally, like this weird perspective piece with like a tunnel and like an outdoor seascape sort of thing. There are things about it that I like the green tints and the glass and the weird curved nature of the tunnel and how it's all kind of wreckage. But at the same time, like, it was very limiting because the foreground space is very limited. The background space is all obscured and outside of the structure. Um, Everything is at weird angles and hyper extended perspectives that make it difficult to use for stream stuff. So, ultimately, every time it felt like I wanted to bring someone else in the stream for like co op gaming or something, like it felt like I had nowhere for anybody to sit. It was like a badly designed feng shui situation. And like part of what I wanted to do was, rectify that sort of thing by creating a scene like this that is more focused on a sort of foreground element, where I can be in the space. I can put people in the background a little bit more competently, with overlapping elements that make it feel more like they're in the space as opposed to like inside in like a flat plane on top of a space. You remember those? I don't know if anybody remembers those scenes where it would be like vinyl. It would be like a scene and you'd have like a bunch of little vinyl stickers that would just kind of static cling to it, and you would put all these little characters and things on it. And it was just like self-assembly sort of thing. But ultimately, those vinyl stickers, they never looked like they were in the scene. They were always on top of it. Half the time, they even had like outlines around the edges of them that were there for production to make sure you didn't cut off any parts of the image. So they would have like the little white borders and stuff around. It was a whole thing. But yeah, like the other scene was kind of feeling like that, and it's still gonna feel like it a little bit because my character is not lit in the same way um as some of this other stuff is, but a little bit of moving and atmospheric layers. If I can find a few more particle gifts and stuff like that to kind of play between the layers so that it feels a little bit more fluid and active and not just like an empty space. um you know, if you had a surface, you would normally do it differently. But all these things, all these things were in my head. And I set some difficult expectations for myself. I could have done a lot of these things more simply. Um, I could have roughed up more edges, had a little bit more of a painterly style, suggested some more things, and just done an illustration instead of a complex set. And I could have been using it months ago, before working on the more elaborate version. But I kind of started where I always do. I start at the end and realize by the time I'm done doing things the hard way that I should have probably done it simply first and then with escalating levels of complexity over time, instead of starting at the complex thing and working backwards, until I understand the simple thing that I should have done all along. Um, and that's hard. That's hard to do because I think when you are really deeply hung up in your own imagination, like, you can see and imagine so much more than you can easily render on a page. And I think that is its own challenge. It is trying to figure out the middle ground, that interpretation of that sort of false reality. And I kind of wish I had a good example of, sorry, random messages. Yay. Um, yeah, I kind of wish that I had thought about things a bit more simply. And I still have a little bit of trouble. I still have a little trouble with roughing out ideas and finding the shapes and designs a little bit more cleanly, um, and kind of letting things rest without overworking the details. And some of this came about because I was trying to get better at working on faces. Because faces are a place where this is very true. Um, I don't know if, yeah, hell with it. We're about to go to break here in a few minutes, anyways. I'll take like 5 or 10 minute break and then come back and actually do a little bit of art towards the end. Just kind of work on these a little bit. I think. See if I can finish out some pieces of this because like I said, I want to not just talk about the things that I've been waffling about, but also maybe execute some of them so that we kind of understand what I've done to myself. But one of the let's see, what is so one of the things I was doing recently is I was trying to like figure out what a concept was of like a dive helmet because I've been struggling a little bit with that. I wanted to create something that felt um like it could handle the pressure, but not in a realistic current situation sort of day, a deep sea environment with a bit of sci-fi adaptation thrown in. And so what I was doing is I was kind of like roughing in a silhouette and then trying to paint into that, like with as few layers as possible, the rough concept of how that is constructed, which I feel like is fairly important when you're doing any bit of art and trying to do it quickly. But I also kind of screwed myself over a little bit by choosing a subject matter and what's the words I'm looking for? A subject matter, a location, like a setting, and a sort of theme of semi-realism with kind of a sci-fi bent. It's not like everyone's zipping around in magic bubbles or anything like that. Like it's kind of grounded sci-fi surrealist sort of underwater setting. So you have lots of hard surface materials. You've got submarines and habitats and uh all of these man-made mechanical environments and tools that ultimately are going to give me an aneurysm one day. So I was trying to figure out how I can rough out and understand silhouettes before I start diving into the complexity of trying to draw a hard surface thing in perspective. And I gave this little I did this little rough looking profile view of a human person with as close to reasonable proportions as I could get at the time. And so I started doing little roughs, like just leaving it painterly and like trying to understand where the lines and stuff were, where I wanted the weight to be, how I wanted it to be connected to the rest of the suit. You can see I start with something that feels a bit like a motorcycle helmet, but I quickly came to the idea that it would probably be something that's attached directly to the suit, that you wouldn't want all of that pressure pinching in around your neck, which is such a sensitive area of the human body. You would want to have that kind of locked in and be able to turn your head inside, which means a lot of this smaller stuff like this motorcycle helmet, you wouldn't want that because you turn your head inside that, you're not able to turn your head. You kind of just have to turn your eyes if the neck is locked in place. And if you can turn your neck with the helmet, then you've got that pressure problem. And I like did a couple smaller ones before I recognized the problem. And I did like this big clunky beast. I kind of like this one. This is reminds me a bit of some of the solar suits from Sunshine. You can see here, you can't even see the person's face. Like this is just this huge, chunky apparatus, and I kind of like the feel of this one for sure. As one of the types, like I wanted to give a couple different types of suits, and I like this one a little bit too. I think this is based off of some designs I saw that had some atypical types of attachment, some atypical visors and things. And what I liked about what inspired this one was this sort of really super thick acrylic looking thimble shaped dome that is kind of fitted into this helm. Like it was so thick in places to allow it to withstand the external pressure and press it into the suit instead of breaking it down the middle. And you could still see a little bit of a face in this one, which I also kind of liked. But this is closer to, I feel like, what rapid prototyping and concept art, and it feels a little bit more effortless. It feels a bit more effortless than some of the other stuff that I've meticulously sketched and then meticulously drawn bland line art for that was really smooth, but ultimately did not add a lot of personality to what I was doing. The shots, the compositions were okay, but the suits and stuff were overly simplistic in a way that made it feel less interesting. That it made it feel like a little bit more like pulpy sci-fi comics from the 50s and 60s than it did anything I would be creating today. And I'm trying to think. Yeah, there was one other thing. Like I said, I was trying to do faces, and I managed to do one or two. So this is, let's see, which one. This is the first one I was kind of happy with. Simple style that suggests the things but is not overly worked with different types of lines. I liked this one a little bit less. I don't know. It was drawn off of a real person, but something about it I wasn't happy with the composition. This one, this last one that I did, I feel like got closer to what I wanted, and it felt like I had more control over this one. It kind of got like the right right level of detail, um, while feeling like I had, designed as much of it as I could myself as far as how to execute it, how and where to place color and things like that. With some of the other ones, I was getting too close to life drawing, and so I wasn't stylizing or taking any shortcuts. But like the temptation, I guess, when you're doing faces and stuff like this, is to line everything. All these different spots where you would know that there are details like a little watermark in the corner of the eye, the extra eyelashes, the extra wrinkles here, maybe some wrinkles and lines here, a little bit of this sort of corner thing, the sort of shape of the bag under the eye, even if it's relatively smooth, is not as flat as this. Like these lines right here were about as close as I wanted to get. And then like outlining the cheekbones and like kind of like almost outlining a skull, having excessive, detailing on the lips, having, crazy amounts of detail in the eyes, as opposed to these relatively simple blocks of color. Um, Trying to do all of these strands of hair separately on the top layer where I just kind of left it as a black ink silhouette. Um, like there's tons of things that can really overwork a piece while you're trying to represent all of these shapes, like the shape of the nose. Like if you're doing the planes kind of like this, um, you've got all of these different planes of the face so you understand the construction. But if you draw all of those lines, they just become, a clunky sculpture, a robot. And I kind of hope that with, getting into the style, I can hint at a few things and create people with expression, with a bit of dynamic light and shape, but not have it be, you know, real world sketchy. And get to my ideas sooner so that I don't come to hate them and overwork them and become dissatisfied, so I don't get lost in the details until the piece is overworked and I feel like I have to abandon it. Because if I can sit down and do something like this in an hour, that means I could do three more in 3 more hours. I can potentially create the line drawing for something like this over and over because the lines are simple. Like, like it's very simple, like 2 lines for this, a few extras for the to suggest those. One big flat space for the eye with 2 little shapes, painted in for highlight and sort of the color of the eye just barely showing. A line here for the eyelid that's barely there. Excuse me. Ouch. A line here, line there. A few dark patches of ink where I don't want to draw like infinite little details or cross hatching. Just let the inks sink in and give me the shape of the ear. That the ear is probably the most complex space in there, and it's mostly because I just drew in extra lines where if I just leave it as those big patches of black ink, the ear is believable, but is it hyper real? No. The nose here, like this simple sort of curve with the hooks on the end conveyed a nose before I even added these pieces, and it felt more real to me than when I try and carefully sculpt the different geometries of someone's nose, which are sometimes like these multifaceted gems of angles, not always rounded. Most of the time, like my nose in particular, if I was looking at my own, I've got like, you know, just as many planes as I just scribbled on here. If I was trying to draw my own, um, there's, like this underlayer, there's a little bit of a slight dip in the middle, there's this sort of this, and this diamond shape, and then it goes out a little bit further around here. Like, if I had done all of that, this person would have looked more like a transformer than, you know, the model that I was drawing inspiration from when I drew this. Um, And I did go hunting for reference for like 2 hours, trying to find unique faces that weren't just something that felt photoshopped. Like, I know we're drawn to attractive faces, but I feel like interesting faces make more sense to me. Like people that feel more like people and not like a mannequin. Like the mannequin may have perfect symmetry in their features, but it doesn't make as much sense to me as like the difference in the face here. Like the way the lips and nose and eyes are all slightly larger. And this is pretty close to the original model. I don't know where I put the reference, but like I sat there for a while trying to recreate this person, and ultimately I didn't like how it was turning out, but it's not like terrible. Like these lines, while kind of excessive, conveyed a bit of the age of the character and such. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know how I feel about a lot of these, but it is it is related to the subject matter of trying to find my way to a simpler execution, to creating art that I feel like I can set in motion without feeling overwhelmed by the amount of art that has to be done. And that doesn't mean that I won't feel overwhelmed at any point, but lowering that bar a little bit so where I understand I don't have to render every leaf on a tree to convey an idea. Like, here's a good, here's an example that I haven't. Where is it? There was one I did during October's Halloween stuff that I just decided to do and didn't really think about. I just kind of sat down and drew it and didn't let myself get caught up in the details too much. And that was, let's bring up the original. And that was this here. So, like, there's a lot of stuff that's just rough brush strokes in this. Like some of the background trees and stuff are actual tree brushes, but all of the grass and stuff in the foreground, all of these little marks and silhouettes and the hairlines and all the stuff, all this little detail on this weird kelpie demonic horse, like I did all of this in like a handful of hours and it felt more complete than this. It felt more complete than this. Even though the levels of detail or visual interest are kind of comparable in my eyes, I spent way more time so far, like dozens of hours working on this set piece than this that I just kind of sat down and just went nuts on. Didn't overthink anything. I just kind of, like whenever I got to the point where I was like, are these inks too dark? Is this going to create something? I said, no, just keep going. Just keep going. Lay in the inks even deeper. Like, make that part of the composition. Like, make it strange because the point is to convey strangeness, to convey an otherworldliness. And if you're worried about, showcasing the anatomy of horse hooves, then, I might have missed out on some of the key things that I feel like really make this interesting, like these big kind of pools of, jet black mane and tail that um stretch down into the water and kind of add that weight and water to everything, or being overly concerned about hyper detailing, the weird mouth that stretches onto the neck and the teeth and everything. Like, if I had been focused on that, if I had been focused on creating perfect horse eye anatomy instead of just creating that little pinpoint of light. I could have spent, another 2 hours, trying to perfect all of the different aspects of this fucking horse. And it might not have mattered unless my objective was to create a highly technical drawing of a horse. I might have completely missed the point of making it feel strange, making it feel a little bit like jagged and uneven, like a little bit more angular here and here than, a real horse would be. And if, the other thing being like I want to render all these blades of grass, so like leaving the grass as silhouette, like how many more hours would it have taken me to like shade the blades of grass to match the moonlight and have the shadow on one side and the dark on the light on the other from the moonlight source. Like if I had individually stippled every star in the sky, how much longer would that have taken me? How much better would it have been if I had done that? And the answer is probably not much. If anything, it might have looked worse. But me using, a scatter brush and then stippling in a few of these kind of uneven, imperfect little star points of light that are just like little, swooshes in places. Like some of them are perfect dots, others are like regular shapes, some of them are literally streaking like that. Like if I had obsessed over where all the stars were placed, I might not have finished this. And I feel like the lesson was almost immediately forgotten because I got into the rest of October stuff, and was stressing myself out so much about doing more art and more things in October that I ended up doing far less than I had set out to do. Um, and if I had just made not less effort but less stress about the effort, I would have accomplished far more. Like if you're death gripping the pen until your hand and your arm hurts, it's going to be harder to complete something than if you just relax and let it flow. And the difference in the artwork is going to be substantial, not because you tried harder, because sometimes trying harder or trying too hard is what breaks it. And that's something I've had trouble learning, because whenever I find myself failing at something, my desire is immediately to try it again but harder because I must have just done it wrong. And it fails to take into account that sometimes the thing that I'm doing wrong is that I'm trying so hard that I'm making something that I care about miserable, that I'm stifling my own creativity or my own desire to work on a project by stapling all these other expectations to it. And it's difficult to separate that out, to kind of shut off the rest of your mind and focus only on being in the moment of the painting or the drawing that you're doing, not worrying about if it's going to turn out perfect or if it's going to turn out terrible, but worrying about just doing the art in the moment. Like what kind of is feeling right and what feels off, and being okay with looking at something and fixing it, or looking at something and setting it aside and saying, like I spent a little while, drawing this line work, but ultimately I chose not to render it because I had feelings about, like how it was turning out. So instead of having something closer to this, I just, I have this empty plane, and you know, and then I ultimately turned around and did this one, which I felt even more clear and focused about. So sometimes you just have to put stuff down and walk away from it. Sometimes you have to stop doing art for a little while, not a long time. That's one thing I would caution against, is like just like, well, if I come back in 6 months, like, no, you're probably going to start over if you come back in 6 months. uh, but 6 hours or a day or two. Like if you're not on a deadline that requires you to kind of weigh in um every single day, if you're not on the job where someone's expecting you to punch in art and then punch out, then one of the best things that I feel like you can do is take a reasonable break and allow yourself time for your mind to catch up to what you've learned. And that's hard too, because a lot of the conventional wisdom is draw every day, practice, draw for hours and hours and hours and hours, and there is a lot of that is true. Um, but just like working out any other muscle or part of the brain, if that's all you do, then you're not going to realize where you're ingraining bad habits. You can inadvertently practice something that is terrible, or repeat something that is satisfying but ultimately stopping you from progressing because you don't stop to think about the art outside of actually doing it, and doing so reasonably and not being so harsh on yourself that you feel like you look back on the results and you're like, oh, this is shitty, it'll never be good, and I'll never be an artist. That's not, that doesn't have to be true. But yeah, I need to take a little break in the middle here. We'll come back, and it's a little bit more. It's yeah, it'll be like probably a little bit more than the 2 hours. We'll see. Um, Normally it would just be 8 to 10, but I kind of ran over the middle, so I'll probably just step away for like 5 minutes and stretch, get something to drink so my voice doesn't give out, and then maybe we'll come back and we'll scribble a little bit. Maybe I can sum up, all of my thoughts about all of this and see where we get. Ultimately, it would be kind of cool to edit this down for like an actual essay sort of thing. Uh, but I'm still a little wary of the video editing process. The hardest part of video editing for me is listening to my own voice and trying to, like, over the course of a long period of time, figure out what the hell I'm talking about and like cut it together in a way that takes away all of the rambly bits that don't help. Uh, but yeah, we all have things that are just a little bit uncomfortable when it comes to hearing our own voices. I'm more used to it than you might expect, but it doesn't make it any less uncomfortable, especially when you're very self-critical. But I'll be back in like 5 minutes probably, and I'll see if I can't paint in just a little bit of background color and the like to break up all of these blues and grays, so that it doesn't feel so shocking when you get the like oranges and reddish tints in there, the warm colors on some of the crates and boxes and things. And, maybe after that, I'll have enough that I can go find, you know, the particle sims and stuff that I want to give it that kind of moving quality and not spend so much time obsessing over uh, making this set somehow perfect when the one that I was happy with for a long time was far from perfect. And somehow that was more endearing than this labor of anxious detailing that I have done. But yeah, give me a few minutes, stretch, get something to drink. We'll come back and we'll wrap up for the evening. Well, walked away and realized that one of the elements of the stream had not been turned on. Good, wonderful. I feel kind of bad I have been monitoring chat as much. It's starting to make me wonder if I just need to be worrying about live stream stuff another time and instead focusing on something more like producing videos, just finishing that and putting it in place, before I worry about spending time interacting with people. But that is a weird brainism that I don't fully understand yet, and we'll see how it goes in the long term. I do like the idea of still continuing to stream and having a little bit of stream of consciousness time. I just want to be able to better interact with people when I do it, and not have so much of that time just be like a straight monologue. Like, if I'm gonna just talk for an hour or 2 hours or something like that, I might as well be doing a video essay. And I could put more effort and thought into that, as a written project first, and then whatever visuals have to go with that, so that it could you know be more reasonably consumed when and however people like. Picardo, I can't really save my streams right now. On the YouTube side, I have the streams that will be kind of like saved on there, so I don't have to pay Picardo. But ultimately, it would be nice, to be able to produce some of that stuff a little bit more, to record it and not feel like I am wasting anybody's time if I take breaks throughout the recording, or if I cut and edit things back together. It's a little bit more work, I think, but I think it would be worth it for the final product to be better. Anyways, pontification aside, what is the message for today? It's a tough one. So I feel like I've spent a lot of time saying, like I've, talking like I feel as though I've wasted time and effort and the like. And sometimes it definitely feels like I have. I think the important thing has been to, in some ways, spend a little bit of time thinking about exactly what those sorts of, what am I trying to say? Thinking about exactly what it is that I would do differently if I did it again, as opposed to marking all of this work as some sort of complete and utter failure of vision, because I feel like this is still salvageable. Maybe that's where the revision part of this comes in, is understanding where to stop. And I think one of the thoughts I had before the stream was that sometimes, effectively what we're doing is we're trying to decide when to stop. And that can be hard. That can be, that can be difficult, to decide when to walk some stuff back, like I'm doing right now with an overly aggressive highlight. Like, when do you make things more subtle? When do you cover up your work that you spent so much time on because it looks better compositionally if you do so? Like, what is it? I guess, Drawfee, which I have a great appreciation for as a channel, because it was one of the first ones I saw where I saw people like engaging with art in a positive way. a lot of the art culture out there can be negative if you look in the wrong places. Especially if you're trying to learn, there's a lot of people trying to make, a quick buck, telling you, to give up if you suck, or giving you advice that's not really advice. It's just how they do things without like really explaining to you how they got to those conclusions or anything. A lot of stuff that can lead you to like giving up on art when there's still, a great deal of promise in the kind of things that you're doing. And one of the things that they say, sorry, I got a little off topic there. One of the things that I think has become a running joke with Drawfee is the delete your art situation. And I've seen it happen a lot with complex compositions on there as well. But sometimes you draw and create a thing and you realize that half of it, if you want the composition and the visual interest to be good, is going to be hidden. And some of that has happened to me here with this area behind, these foreground objects. Like anywhere that I've spent a lot of time rendering behind a hidden space that nobody will probably ever see. Um, and being okay with covering that up and not letting it kind of get to you when you do. Understanding that you still did it even if nobody sees it, and that you have learned a great deal from the process, and that it's just basically practice that wasn't marked as practice, I guess. This is me talking to me at this point, but yeah, just understanding in places where I feel like I wasted a lot of my time, and trying to understand that it wasn't time wasted. Maybe some of that time could have been better spent, but it's already spent. I cannot go back in time and regain, you know, does a dozen hours of excessive detail work on parts of this drawing that no one will ever see or probably care about, apart from myself. And I will probably even forget that I have done at some point in the future. All of that is ultimately not wasted if you learned something from it. And that, I think, is one of the hardest parts, is letting yourself learn something from it and not ending up feeling like you've wasted so much time that you might as well quit. And that's the part that I always catch myself doing, is that sort of mindset that, like, oh, I screwed this up so bad, I should never do this again. And if everybody did that with everything that they got wrong the first time, I don't think we would have any artists, except for the rare one in a million that just mentally were already on the page that most of us have to work towards. And if you're not magically a genius, then everyone would give up on art, and artists would be so rare that our world would be poorer for it. And I don't think that's really what we want to go for. Doesn't feel like a good place to be. And so I guess one of the struggles is sometimes the advice of working on something until you're satisfied with it can backfire. I know I've given that advice. 100% I have given that advice. That it only needs to be as good as when you're satisfied with it. But the downside to that is that sometimes the doubts in your mind the anxiety about the end result, especially if it's artwork that is particularly meaningful to you, either because you put a lot of time and effort into it, or because it is meaningful subject matter, or because it's, what you're relying on for your next meal. Um, it's going to be hard to be satisfied with some of those things, and we can very much sabotage our own work by pushing those limits. And something I wish I had thought about earlier in the process of this piece, and maybe I did it a little bit because I took so long to finish it, but something I wish I had done a little bit earlier to take pressure off of this piece was just consider, of course, that I may never be fully satisfied with the work. Not because it's terrible, not because I haven't worked hard enough on it, but because, I'm still not as confident as I could be in my own work. There's still a lot of doubt in my mind sometimes about whether or not I can, truly do this for a living. And so those doubts are going to make me doubt whether something is done, whether I shouldn't add more detail here or remove more detail there, work it and rework it until it's, until the horse is well beaten to a paste. Um, and ultimately still ending up being dissatisfied with the end result because I couldn't let it be, I couldn't let it rest, and I was too afraid of, like what that might mean. Um, and like learning to let all of that stuff go. Like it's not an easy thing. I'm not saying I'm even capable of doing it right now because there's a lot riding on me figuring out how to kind of do this as, a job. But I think it was hurting the work more than it was helping. Like I've consistently walked right up to the line on many things that were good ideas that I was enthusiastic about. And once I got in my own head about it, I, beat that idea to death before it could even, become something significant, before I could take it into the world and share it with people and like actually have it fulfill its purpose. I was stopping it from being. And I didn't have to. I didn't have to do it that way. I didn't have to be that hard on myself or the nature of the work. I could have stopped a lot sooner and thought critically about what I wanted to occur. It feels weird to be saying all this stuff about, like how I need to stop and let it be done while I'm continuing to fix things, but I guess the point here is that you can revise. Nothing is set in stone. Sometimes you want to walk away from a piece, but sometimes, like, why not fix it? As long as you can acknowledge that it may still not turn out as good as you want, like, you can still take a little time to potentially make it better. Like, in this case, just making a few things a little bit more subtle makes me feel better about this piece, about using it for things, than what's the big deal? And ultimately, there's going to be a lot of things in here that are not perfect, and I'm gonna have feelings about, you know, even when I have decided that it is done. That's what I wanted. Let's see. Actually, and sorry. One of the things that I was not happy with was that I didn't like cast a little bit of a contact shadow sort of situation here. Then we do a little blur. This is what I mean about it's a little bit harder to get an idea of what I'm saying when I'm trying to actively test stuff out. Yeah, just a little bit of a contact shadow there. That's it. That makes me happier. Just that being there and feeling like I corrected a problem. Now there's a bit of, like I said, a little bit of like rust painting and color grading and stuff that I'll probably do after the stream, but um ultimately what could have happened to this, what happens with a lot of artwork that people get in the weeds with and can't let go and build up in their minds until it's got too much worth attached to it, is the sort of idea, or too much worth attached to it. Like it could have gone the way of just being abandoned, and stuff like this. If I got ambitious with something, and you know got too caught up in details until the whole project was muddy and hard to read, and I'm still not 100% sure I'm not in that valley right here. Um, I could have just walked away from it and decided, like this was a failure, and that I, in connection, I think that's one of the hardest things about art, when it comes to learning to give yourself a bit of slack, to take it easy, to kind of relax yourself, both physically and mentally, so that you can create art that is effectively effortless because it flows out without all of that anxiety and angst and such attached to it. Um, is that kind of separation that we don't want to do, because art is often so personal, because you are creating it from yourself, because you are creating something in some cases which, is your brainchild, your original characters, your worlds, your designs. Like all of these things are inherently personal, and so it can be very difficult to separate the failure or the not even the failure, but the failure to meet expectations of a drawing, of a painting, of a piece of artwork, of a sculpture, of a piece of writing, anything that you are creatively, you know, working to bring into the world is going to be personal, and if it fails to meet your expectations, it will feel like a failure not just of the work but of yourself. And it is very difficult for many people, for most of us, myself included, to not internalize that failure as a failure of self, as opposed to just another step in the journey to becoming a better artist, to become whatever it is that you're doing creatively. Every time you fall short of your expectations or the expectations of someone else who actually has, a reason to have expectations, um, that's an opportunity to learn, change, or grow, or D, all of the above. Um, and I think sometimes we forget that. We, because it is so personal and it hurts so much when we fall short on a creative endeavor, because it is so personal. It's hard to separate that work from ourselves, to not attach our self worth as a person to our artwork, because those two things are interlaced with one another so closely. Um, and it breeds a lot of fear and anxiety and angst and frustration. And I, I don't know if it helps at all, but one of the things that I try to keep in mind, or I'm trying to keep in mind when it comes to artwork at least, is that you cannot place yourself in competition with the human brain. And not to toot our own horns or anything like that, but the human brain is a complex mechanism beyond the scope of anything that we can currently technologically recreate. We still don't entirely understand how a lot of it works. We've been trying to figure it out for centuries. And it may be centuries still before we get to the depths of what we find to be the last frontier of the human mind. So we think of people in a far more down to earth fashion. But when it comes to recreating an image, you cannot compete with the human brain as far as presenting the level of detail, as far as getting something that's in your head to look exactly like it is in your head on the page, unless you change how you think about how you can suggest and present those ideas. Because you are, the only way to win that fight is not to participate. Uh, and yes, you could spend 1,000 hours recreating a photo, or 10,000 hours recreating a movie by repainting every single still frame of that movie into an animated sequence. You could do that. But the amount of time and effort that it takes to do that is not necessarily equal to, I think, it's not an equivalent exchange. Like, it's far more effort and time than I think the final product will ultimately be given, because at a certain point you're competing with something you're in the wrong race. And I think art is in a unique position in its many forms, whether it be animation, illustration, uh, filmmaking, games, uh, any variety of art, right down to creative and written forms. Uh, its strength is in suggesting something to the supercomputer of a mind that that almost everyone has. I don't know why I changed that to almost everyone. I guess I'm implying that there are dumb people out there, but that's not the point. Um, uh, art is a form of suggestion. You are conveying and sharing ideas, you are giving the impressions. You will never be able to fill in the entirety of what the human eye can capture unless you manage to scan from your brain. Because every time you see something, you're seeing it in a unique way. No one else sees the world exactly the way that you do. There are a lot of commonalities, but there are people who go their entire lives not realizing they can see a color that nobody else can see, or that they can't see colors that other people can, or that the color they thought was, green or blue or something like that turns out to be a completely different color, and there's just not a moment in time that brought that to their attention. Um, so yeah, don't compete with reality. If you're making art, try and set a reasonable bar. Try and go for what conveys the idea. And I think I talked about this last week too. So maybe it's just something I'm trying to beat into my own skull. Um, Convey the idea. Don't worry about perfectly recapturing what is in your mind. And the more you do that, I feel like the closer you will get to recapturing it, because you're not white knuckling it through your art. You're not constantly struggling to get that perfect detail, to get that perfect inked line. Most of the artwork, if you really look at it, that you find to be a form of perfection is far less perfect in its representation of what it's creating than you realize. Look at any high-end painting. Look at, any number of things that are viewed as the highest forms of art from like the Renaissance and so on. And you will almost instantly notice upon looking closer that entire people, entire faces, entire details of a complex looking hand are just single brushstrokes. And our minds are filling in the rest. And the more you try and fight your way to that perfect recreation, the more you stumble deeper and deeper into that uncanny valley, the less happy you're going to be with your artwork. The more you're going to overwork it, the more sketchy and like hairy the lines will be, and the proportions will be off. Like everything just gets so much harder when you put so much pressure on it. And I don't have the perfect formula for how to take pressure off your artwork, except to be mindful of that, to think to yourself, why am I so frustrated at this particular part of the drawing? Do I need to step away for a little while? And sometimes it's put it down, come back to it the next day. And just like many other problems, your mind will keep working on it. You will think about it just a little bit. And when you come back, you might be surprised that you might have found the solution that was evading you in the moment, because all you could think about was how frustrated you were, or how disappointed in yourself that you were, or how much you didn't like what was happening. And so you couldn't think about how to fix it, how to change it, how to solve the problem. All you could think about was that the problem existed and it was in your way. And sometimes you just need time. Sometimes you just need the presence of mind to step back and think about, how to work your way around that problem or solve it. And sometimes you just need to let stuff go that is easier said than done. And I am well aware of that. I am not saying just do it, because that's the opposite, I think, sometimes of what you need. You need to understand why it's hard. You need to understand why it bothers you. And if you don't understand that about yourself, you're going to have that much more trouble figuring out how to get past it to create the art you want to create. But that is just my 2 cents. I feel like I can't add much more than that, and I really want to sit down and focus on drawing some more on this now that I've had this conversation with you and myself. Um, to see whether or not I've learned anything. And it'll be easier to do that if I can just focus. And maybe that's, sub lesson. Give yourself time to focus, but also give yourself time away to think about what you've learned from that experience. And you might be surprised how the solutions come to you and when. I know that I have consistently been surprised uh, when I wake up thinking about the solution to a piece of art sometimes um, that I was frustrated with and just didn't know what to do with. That's happened once or twice with this composition. And it's happening a little bit now with like finally deciding to just finish it and put it into action. Hopefully I'll have it for the next stream. I have several more scenes that I want to create, and I want those to be far easier on the eyes and my mind. Even if the art style isn't 100% consistent, it will at least have been the learning experience that I wanted. I think that is all I have for this evening. Um, if you're watching this later, maybe you get an edited version on YouTube. There's always the original live stream. Um, just look for No Sleep Too Deep on YouTube if you can't find it there. Um, good luck, I guess. And I don't know. I don't know how much more unique a name I can really put together there without putting a tons of special characters. But I'll think about this content going forward. I like these chats. I like some of the live raw nature of them, but maybe I need to reduce the streaming a little bit and instead focus a little bit on production of more polished video content that has these ideas outlined in a clear and a recognizable fashion with a bit more drawing and art rendering in the background at speed so that that essay can be understandable, I guess. But I do like streaming and I do like interacting with people. It just feels like these streams don't get a lot of that. So I might as well be making videos that I can edit down or speed up, etc. And save the live streaming for when I want that interaction and for when there's more people to do it. It's neither here nor there. But I am now rambling about things that have nothing to do with the stream subject matter. In the long term, final advice is give yourself a break when it comes to your art. Don't compete with the human brain or the human eye. Convey the idea with as simply as you can, and you might be surprised how much more relaxed you start to feel about the art that you're creating when you don't get bogged down in details, when you uh, reach a certain level of comfort with roughing the idea out and then not having to work so hard to refine or detail it in the way that you want. Just letting the human mind complete the composition for you is one of those small things that is very counterintuitive. If you ever want good examples, like I said, just go look at other people's artwork, not as a whole, but up close, and see how simple the lines are, how simple the color passes are sometimes. Singular brushstrokes can convey so much if they're just done with a degree of confidence and with given a little bit of room to breathe. Unlike the composition that I've left behind on the other screen, uh, which is still a little busy. We'll see what we can do about that. That's it for tonight. Thanks for hanging out, and see everybody in the next stream, the next video, whatever it happens to be. One of these days, I'll have an intro and an outro, and I'll just press a button for this. And life will be simpler. Hope your holidays were okay, and hope that going into December you're having a good season. I know holiday seasons are kind of weird for a lot of people, so be mindful of yourself and take care of yourself during this time. Enough rambling. All the art has been rambled. All the rambling has been rambled. Talk to everybody next time.